Today's episode of the TribCast is sponsored by the Safer Texas Alliance and the Beer Alliance of Texas. Welcome to the TribCast. I'm Eleanor Klibanoff, women's health reporter, here with my colleague, Jasper Scherer. Is it Scherer?
Yeah.
Every time I panic. Scherer.
You're good.
Okay.
That's spot on.
Coming from Klibanoff. That's,
right.
yeah. Very excited to have you here, Jasper. How's it been going?
It's good. Good. Happy to talk THC and Dan Patrick. I feel like that's been occupying a lot of my coverage lately.
Yes. Yeah. But before we start, I know you had like a really specific topic you wanted to get into on this. You've been deeply watching Meghan Markle's new show on Netflix. You wanted to offer some thoughts on that to the audience?
Yeah, no, that's we were definitely talking about that before, and I you had to cut me off because I was just droning on and on about that. So glad you put me on the spot. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Yes. That was our April Fool's joke. We had a long debate in the office before you showed up, and this is why you should never show up moments before the TribCast.
Right. I brought that on myself.
About what we could use to prank you. Originally, I was going to ask you to do a deep analysis between the House and the Senate budget comparison. Oof. And Rebecca, our managing editor for Enterprise and Politics, was like, he would just do it.
Yeah.
He would just offer it, and then you won't be able to get him to stop. And that's not that fun.
I think Rebecca's instincts were probably correct on that.
We were like, what politics topic can we ask him about that would panic him? And I don't think there's anything.
Yeah. I mean, it was so out of bounds that I knew there was something going on. Yeah. But no, I feel like you always have something up your sleeve.
Even on April Fool's Day.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, we are. Are you a big April Fool's guy?
You know, I wouldn't say so. I'm kind of just, but I always appreciate a good,
good prank.
Especially if I'm like, the butt of the joke. Like I'm just, if someone else wants to have fun with it, I'm all for it.
Love that. Yeah, my college roommate and now one of my best friends is like very into it, and you're like, ugh. There's a fine line. I'm not good at pranks because I go too far or not far enough.
Right.
And she in college would be like, "Can you call my parents?" And be like, "I haven't seen. We haven't heard from her in 3 days." I'd be like, "No."
Yeah,
I'm doing that.
There's a line. I feel like you did not cross it though with the.
I'm not sure we got close.
Yeah,
it wasn't even that. Yeah. Also, Rebecca was like, "I bet Jasper has seen that show and might have opinions on it."
Are we talking about? We're not talking.
We're not talking about Suits. We're talking about her new, very controversial, not very controversial, her new, somewhat discussed show about in her. It's not actually even in her home, but allegedly in her home.
Right. I have heard some griping though about the authenticity of it.
Yes. So. Yeah. Well, that's not what we're here to discuss, unfortunately, or the budget, thank God. But we are here to talk about a very important topic, as you alluded to, a huge conversation in the Texas legislature this session, which is about the regulation or perhaps banning of THC products. We are joined for this conversation by Heather Fazio, the director of the Texas Cannabis Policy Center, which advocates for expanded access to medical cannabis, supports statewide cannabis decriminalization, and notably for this episode is opposed to what's being called Senate Bill 3, the ban on THC products. Heather, thank you for joining us.
So glad to be here. Thank you.
Are you a prank person?
Not much, but I do appreciate a good one.
Yeah.
There you go.
So before we get into like talking about Senate Bill 3 and THC and all of that, maybe you can just give us the lay of the land on like Texas's cannabis laws, generally speaking. Where do we stand in Texas?
Sure. Well, a lot has changed in the 10 years that we've been doing this work, from over 75,000 people being arrested every year when we started to numbers plummeting now, seeing, I'd say, only 20,000, far fewer than it used to be, 20,000 too many, though, in my opinion. We've also, and the result of that, not only because sentiments are changing with district attorneys, but also city councils passing resolutions or ordinances forbidding their police officers from arresting people. They understand that it's not worth the resources that go into it. Plus, saddling people with criminal records really causes so much harm. And so we've seen that changing locally piece by piece, creating a patchwork policy across the state. I think that's why there's more of an appetite for decriminalization. We've seen it pass in the House. Of course, the Senate's been more of a challenge. But then we have medical that's been expanded several times since it was originally enacted. And now we have this flourishing hemp industry that has really brought us about to the THC conversation in a different way than we expected.
Yeah. Jasper, talk to us a little about THC. Like, how did we get here? Take us back in time a couple years when this all started blowing up.
Well, a lot of this is it can get technical just when you get down to the distinctions between Delta 8 and Delta 9, which is sort of at the root of why we're having this conversation. But essentially, this goes back to the 2018 federal farm bill that authorized and sort of gave the green light for states to authorize consumable hemp products, which is what Texas followed suit and did in 2019. The authors behind that bill have been, basically they've expressed that their intent was not to create this sort of explosion of, we're at over 8,000 licensed hemp retailers now, and Dan Patrick, who signed off on that bill, Charles Perry, the author in the Senate, who is now leading the charge on SB 3, as you referenced earlier. That has sort of been their main talking point, that this was more just intended to be an agriculture-based bill. It was not supposed to greenlight all these products. But as I'm sure we'll discuss, there is also this countervailing point that a lot of folks have become just accustomed to and sort of come to rely on these products. And some of the pushback has come to this proposed ban has come even from like veteran groups who, folks who are using these hemp products for, even medicinal reasons, or because the state's medical program is so limited. So a lot of nuance to this discussion, and also I think it's hard to predict where this is going, just because of the differences between the House and Senate. So it's kind of been a fascinating political issue to observe.
Right.
Yeah.
So to summarize, 2018 federal green light,
Right.
2019 Texas green light,
Right.
2025 either a yellow light or a red light, we assume, and we're going to get more into the specifics. But the House seems to be pushing more of a yellow light regulation. Let's pump the brakes a little bit. Senate seems to be pushing more slam on the brakes. This is over. There was a great quote in, I think it was a Senate committee hearing about this, where Charles Perry said, who's the senator who carried the 2019 bill and is now carrying the bill to ban these products. He said, "I told these retailers, if you guys screw this up by being cute and getting people high off of it, there will be consequences. I'm disappointed, but I'm not surprised that we're here today." Which is funny to me, because it's also what your parents would say to you if you got high in high
Right.
school.
You just tell the tone of disappointment in his voice. Yeah.
Right. I don't know if he has kids, but it has that vibe of,
For sure.
He has kids and is used to lecturing them about their
Trying to permanently ground the industry now.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So this industry, in between 2019 and now, this industry has popped up. This has flourished. We've seen pardon the pun, the highs and lows of this. Heather, tell us a little bit about, where the industry stands now.
Sure. Well, it's been 6 years since the original legislation passed that enabled this. It did get talked about in terms of industrial applications of this plant, which we certainly hope to see really take off as investments catch up and there becomes more consumer demand for things like hemp paper and hemp rope, things like that. But there also was that kind of tangent of CBD and consumable hemp products. And that's what the Department of State Health Services understood their task to be. But because of the way the law was written, ultimately, THC products have made their way legally to the market, and the Department of State Health Services really hasn't ever caught up to regulating this industry effectively. There are rules on the books at the federal and the state level. It's regulated by multiple agencies. So it's really silly when we hear this as an unregulated industry. It certainly is regulated, but it's not being enforced adequately by our state government. So we need them to step up to the plate to make sure that we're holding bad actors accountable, because while there are many good actors, high quality products on the market, there are bad actors flying under the regulatory radar, and that's our biggest concern.
Right. I mean, it is. I mean, we talked about this a lot on this podcast, that on almost every issue, right, there is some area of agreement. There's a real disagreement on what to do with that once we agree on that, right? Both sides of this sort of agree that there may be too unfed, like the access to these consumable hemp products, these THC products, may be too unfettered, right? There are people who are like children are able to, walk into a store and buy these, like there's many of these products that are sort of modeled to look like candy products or to look like something you would want to have if you were a child. And there's like insufficient age regulate or age monitoring. There's insufficient consequences maybe for people who are trying to, as you said, fly under the radar. Is that right?
Absolutely. And those are the types of regulations that we've been asking for some time now. The legislature has fallen short 2 sessions now since the original legalization of hemp to institute these kinds of regulations. And so now there's this sense of urgency, some heresy going on, and just such strong language being used to demonize this industry that many of which are really wanting to see that kind of regulation. Because, of course, nobody wants to see young people having access to THC. That never would have been on the table for consideration if we were sitting down and having an adult conversation about these policies. But lawmakers, especially our Republican leaders, have been keeping us at arm's length and not allowing this meaningful conversation about how do we do this right. We know that prohibition does not work. It doesn't keep it out of the hands of young people. It doesn't make sure that we have safe products on the market. It doesn't ensure consumer protection. And so, of course, that's why we'd like to see regulation as an alternative to prohibition so we can actually get a good grip of this industry.
I was kind of curious what you make of, the Lieutenant Governor's comments, and I think Senator Perry has said something to this effect too, just that sort of the opposite of what you were saying about prohibition, that it's, they don't feel that regulation is possible, essentially, that they feel we've got to push for a full ban. Like more regulation is great, but
Right.
at the end of the day, it just needs to be a ban because it's not going to be possible to, adequately oversee the industry. I don't know exactly how they phrased it, but
Patrick
kind of
said to tell you exactly how he phrased it was, you just can't regulate it. You've got to take it out. You're never going to be able to regulate it.
right. I'm curious what you make of that.
Well, and for me, it just seems totally flipped. You cannot prohibit these products. Even under policies of prohibition, people still have access to them. These are federally legal products that are prevalent across the country, and we're going to be rounding people up and arresting them and charging them a Class A misdemeanors. We're going to be putting people in jail for up to a year for the possession of these hemp products. I mean, it just doesn't seem feasible. This cat isn't going back in the bag. And really what they're doing is putting themselves in a corner and setting us up to have nothing pass, which means we don't get those age restrictions in place. We don't get the types of restrictions on advertising and packaging to stop appealing to kids. We don't get more resources and a green light for the regulatory agency to step in and start really enforcing the rules that are on the books.
I mean, there's an argument to be made, right, that like the industry will sort of respond to, right? If there's a total ban, there's like less incentive, I mean, particularly with the state the size of Texas, to be producing these products that are so appealing to children or so appealing to that demographic. I mean, this is slightly different in some ways than, just marijuana decriminalization, right? Like there's differences in how we might be able to regulate versus prohibit this newish industry.
Sure. Well, I mean, the question is, do we want to be able to make sure that products that are available in the state, that exist in the state, are tested and labeled? Is that a priority? Is consumer safety a priority? Or do we just want to hand this market over to the illicit industry? Because somebody is going to be profiting off of this. Is it going to be those willing to break the law and traffic the products in? Or is it going to be licensed and regulated business owners who have an incentive to comply with the law? Many of the people operating now are complying with the law. The law just simply isn't sufficient to get us where we need to go.
Are there states that have successfully regulated this, in your opinion?
I think that we're in a really unique position here in Texas because the states that have, Senator Perry has talked about how California and New York have banned these products. But really what they did is pull them into their already regulated cannabis industries. We don't have that here. We have a very much struggling medical cannabis program, and we have no adult use program for THC. So we don't have a place for this to go. We need to create a lane so that this can be controlled through the state with reasonable regulations.
I was wondering if you've had much conversation with folks in the House just to get a sense of how much appetite there is for a full-on ban, as opposed to, how, I guess, committed that chamber is to pursuing the regulations. I mean, for me, it's been hard to get folks to, talk on the record, or really, I mean, sort of my starting point here is just looking at what has been in the bill that they've presented. But I'm curious if you've had any, conversations to get a better sense of, where the House might be headed on this.
Well, they're certainly behind schedule in the House. Things are moving slowly, getting out of there with new leadership, some challenges with that, and we're just really getting the ball rolling on the House side of things. But I can tell you from my conversations and conversations from our allies with legislative offices, including Republican offices, who have supported decriminalization in the past, medical expansion in the past, you're right. There is not an appetite in the House for outright prohibition. They know that that's not the right way to go. Now, what is the right way to go? That's up for us as advocates to help illuminate a path that makes sense for regulation. And now in the State Affairs Committee, there are 3 different bills that are sitting on their table ready for a hearing. We've got Senate Bill 3, outright prohibition. We've got House Bill 28, which is Chairman King's bill, which prohibits a lot. It's not a great bill, but it doesn't prohibit everything entirely, which is good. And then we have Representative Kane's House Bill 4242, which is a regulatory bill rather than prohibition. So we've got the options on the table now, and State Affairs is going to be considering that.
The House holds a lot of power here, right? I mean, the Senate has been very clear about what they want. They've passed this. It sits before the House, like you said. They have a series of choices. The Senate does, or at least Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick believes he has sort of a break glass in case of emergency approach if this doesn't pass. He has said he is willing to go to a special session, which is actually not his purview to call, but he has said, basically he will use the tools he has available to him to force a special session if this doesn't pass. He told the Texas Tribune, Jasper, there aren't many things you go down that path for, but the life and health of people is one. I couldn't in good conscience leave here knowing if we don't do something about it in the next 2 years, how many kids get sick. Jasper, talk about, how that might play out if he does decide if the House doesn't pass what he wants and he decides to sort of break glass.
Well, this is something that he's gone down this road in multiple sessions before, or at least has sort of used this as like a potential bargaining chip. And in recent sessions, when he's made this threat, he hasn't needed to force Governor Abbott to call a special session because they have both agreed that the session was necessary. But going back to 2017 as a model, as you said, the Lieutenant Governor does not have the power himself to call a special session, but he could hold up, for instance, the state budget. That is the only item that the legislature is constitutionally obligated to pass every session, and that's just sort of the most obvious, hostage potential for Dan Patrick, which, as Lieutenant Governor, he has the power to prevent anything he wants from coming to the floor. So there's the state budget that could be held up. There are, what are known as sunset bills to continue the life of key state agencies, like the Texas Department of Criminal Justice is up for sunset review. So
it's a biggie.
Kind of need that one to keep going in some form. So a lot of potential there, and it could get messy and spill over into other business that's completely unrelated to THC if we do end up going down that road.
Right, because Governor Abbott has not been as clear spoken about this, right? Like last session when we had special sessions on vouchers, for example, like that's something Dan Patrick did not need to, summon that much political capital to get Governor Abbott to call that. Governor Abbott has basically said he's waiting to see what the legislature gives him, right?
Yeah. Which, I mean, is, I think, unless it's an issue that he's really, come out proactively on, that is kind of standard operating procedure for him, I think. And, we also haven't heard a ton from, if anything, from Speaker Burrows on the issue. So I think at one of his recent press conferences, Patrick was saying basically, he was sort of speaking on behalf of the rest of the big three, saying, we've met at our breakfast and I think we're all on the same page, but we have not heard it directly from the governor's mouth how he feels on this. Yeah.
Well, and his bully tactics and coercive strategy works in the Senate every time, but it's having less of an influence on the people's house in Texas. They're much more closely related to the House or to their constituents, and that's why they are wanting to reflect the polling numbers, which show that 62 to 68% of Texans want to see these products regulated and available for adult use. So hopefully that prevails this session, and they stick to the people that elected them rather than this top-down coercive strategy that is being really pushed on them by the other chamber.
I want to talk about a little bit more about this sort of Republican divide on this issue. Sorry. But before we do that, let's take a quick break and thank our sponsors. The Safer Texas Alliance supports SB3, advocating for responsible THC policies that protect public health and safety. Explore at safertexasalliance.com. And the Beer Alliance of Texas. SB3 puts public health over profits by banning consumable THC hemp products in the state, and the Beer Alliance of Texas is proud to support this legislation. Learn more at beeralliance.com. So, this is like, I think that alone speaks to this is a divisive issue that's getting a lot of attention. People are sort of taking sides. It's certainly forming another thing we talk about a lot on this podcast, which is that when you are essentially a one-party state for so long, you start to see sort of cracks in the, we can't all agree on everything all the time. And this is certainly playing out that way. I mean, even the fact that the very Republican Texas legislature is debating, do we ban or do we regulate? Two things that party doesn't tend to love to do, is notable. I mean, Jasper, lay out a little bit the, factions here on this.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not as clear cut factionally as maybe some other issues. Like when you think about vouchers, it's very much like a rural urban divide among Republicans. But I do think generally, and I'm sure you have thoughts on this too. Just it's thinking about the Libertarian Party had some representation testifying against SB3 the other week, and just sort of that side of the party and some of the even folks I would put in the farther right end of the spectrum. You mentioned Representative Kane's bill. I think he's kind of been on this train for a while. And just, the fact that the House has supported decriminalization in the past just speaks to, I think, just kind of the party's overall evolving attitude on this issue. I am curious to hear if you have any thoughts on sort of how it breaks down factionally, but my sense is that especially folks who are maybe a little more libertarian minded, that was at least where maybe these shifting attitudes started. Maybe that was kind of at the forefront of the GOP's evolution on the issue. But I mean, it does feel like even folks who are, moderate Republicans of all stripes are at least maybe not willing to go to the mat on this issue like they might have been, say, 20 years ago, right?
Well, there's good reason for somebody of any political persuasion to support regulation and support freedom on this issue. This is a matter of individual liberty, personal responsibility, free enterprise. And when we lean into those values that so many of us hold dear and politicians like to talk about, when we apply them here, it makes sense to move forward with a safe and legal market for cannabis rather than continuing to push it into the shadows, which is certainly not where anything good ever comes from.
I mean, what is your sense of, when you look at, you said the last 10 years of this, have you seen the Republican Party evolve on this issue? Have the factions formed in different ways over the last decade?
Well, there has been a shift that was pretty steady. In 2014, they added hemp into the platform for the Texas GOP. 2016, they added medical cannabis into the platform. 2018, they added decriminalization into the platform. And at each subsequent legislative session, we saw the ball move on each of those issues. Then the pandemic hit. 2020 convention cycle was kind of chaos, especially for the GOP. And sadly, since then, we have seen kind of the party's position reverting away from freedom and liberty and towards more social conservatives wanting to control what people do. You talked about Senator Perry and almost seeming scolding, like he's talking to a child. And sadly, the nanny state, something that a lot of these Republicans talk about not wanting, is coming through on this. It is not their job to decide what adults choose to consume. If they want to keep dangerous products off the shelf shelf, we can do that. If we want to keep it away from kids, we can do that. But this, for me, and this is what's motivated me for nearly a decade doing this, is again that individual liberty, personal responsibility, and free enterprise.
I think, kind of what you were getting at there too makes me think of, I think that sort of runs parallel to the GOP's evolving stances on just criminal justice issues as a whole. If you think back to, 80s and 90s when Texas was sort of this, law and order, let's, crack down on everything, expand the prison system, then going into the 2000s, it was, sort of this bipartisan coalition where the Republicans, especially in the House, were all about reforming that system. It wasn't a sustainable, prison boom situation. And I think the evolving attitudes on marijuana and marijuana adjacent products kind of went hand in hand with that. And as you were alluding to, that we've sort of seen a contraction of that, where it's the social conservative folks, and especially Dan Patrick in the Senate they've wanted to crack down on it, and that has also been the faction that has sort of turned the tide against that expanding criminal justice attitude. So it's kind of an interesting parallel there.
Well, and like the issue that this is currently paired with, in Dan Patrick's mind, at least in terms of a special session, is like bail reform, or which, as we've discussed in the newsroom, like bail reform, a expression that's used by both sides, and nobody knows what reform means in that situation.
In the eye of the beholder.
In the eye, right? Reform in the eye of the beholder. But yeah, I think like this sort of things are not always a clean pendulum, right? Like things come and go, and certainly right now this seems to be, as you said, like Heather, a lot of urgency around this issue, a lot of like coming out swinging hard, and Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick has often pressed these big issues into a special session. Saw this with the bathroom bill, which ultimately did not pass. Right, we saw this with the vouchers, which was more Governor Abbott, but still with his support, which did not pass last session. Now here we are. It's likely to be passing this session. So certainly this seems like the bugaboo of the session.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's fair to say.
Yeah. Heather, are you expecting any movement on any other fronts? I know there's a bill also by Senator Perry on the compassionate use program. Where are you expecting to see movement on that?
Well, we certainly hope to see the compassionate use program not only improved, which is what Senator Perry's bill would do. We'd like to see it expanded as well. Far too few people have access to this program. We've seen it really looking like it's on the verge of implosion because of how few people are participating. And certainly there are some people who are going to the hemp market and finding products that are comparable and that they like. But there are other people who would rather go through their doctor and be able to track their progress and really identify how this is helping them from a medicinal standpoint. And so we want them to have access to this. The biggest key to opening up access would be allowing pain as a qualifying condition. Right now, patients are really looking at opioids, which are dangerous and addictive. We know the harm that those medicines have ravished on our country. And offering people an alternative to that really would help to save lives and improve the quality of life for so many people in Texas.
And that bill, what's on the table this session? I mean, so it would double the number of licensed vendors, I guess, that would be facilitating the compassionate use program. I don't know, what's kind of the cliff notes of what's in that bill?
Sure. Well, so in addition to opening up 6 licensed businesses rather than the 3 that we've been stuck at since they were first issued in 2017, it would allow satellite locations. So currently the licensed business owners have to hand deliver medication to patients across the state, which, as you can imagine, gets very expensive. There's no mechanism for them to have even a storage facility, let alone another storefront in the different major areas of the state. That's been a huge reason why the cost of this medicine has been so high. Of course, we also have to talk about the $500,000 to get a license, $315,000 to renew every 2 years, something the government can control to tighten up, bring down those costs. But having satellite locations is really going to help not only those 3, but then we're going to have 6 in all the different public health districts throughout the state of Texas. So that should really help. Additionally, there are some restrictions on the THC that's allowed. And originally, I thought this was a big concern. We're limiting it to 5 milligrams. milligrams. They can only have 350 milligrams in a package. They can only have 90-day supply. But after talking to the licensees, there is no restriction on the milligrams a patient can have total. It's just the individual unit can only be 5 milligrams. So I'm less concerned about those as I was originally. But one big concern with that 6 license is that's a cap at 6. Currently, we have a mandatory minimum of 3 that had to be licensed, and they've kept it at that, even though there was no cap on the number of licenses they could issue. Now this 6 institutes a cap, and I'm concerned about that from a big picture standpoint. Free markets is something that I value, and if we're going to have this industry thrive, it's going to be through competition. It's going to be through the best products and services available on the market.
Yeah. The first hearings about the SB3, the ban, got kind of contentious. It was huge turnout, clearing the gallery, a lot of big feelings around this issue. You were there. Talk to us a little bit about what happened there and like what you're expecting to hear from people and how people might make their voices heard the rest of this session.
Right. Well, this is an $8 billion industry when it was last tallied in 2022. I think it's much more than that now, 50,000 employees. There are people that have put their lives on the line to open a business in Texas, to follow the rules that are on the books, and now are risking having that pulled out from underneath them. And so that's why we saw such a tremendous turnout at the Texas Senate hearing for this bill. We saw lots of people testifying, sharing their personal stories and experience, including consumers. One of the most explosive testimonials was from a woman named Piper Lindeen. She's a mom who her child has seizures. They've tried the compassionate use program products. They didn't work. Now they use hemp products that they trust from another state, actually, somebody who's reputable. It's working for her son. And this would take their access from that medicine away. And so they are very concerned. And she was very emotional because there just wasn't very much engagement from the committee members. And her mama bear mode came to full force, and of course the audience responded, and that was when the House Gallery ended up getting cleared by the chairman. And I'm sure that's not the first time that's ever happened, but I've never seen it happen, and it really showed just how high the tensions are on this. And I think that we can expect to continue to see that kind of energy coming in. Hopefully, of course, we encourage everyone to try to be as positive as possible coming into the House. We know that that's where our shot is. Because again, House members are listening.
And Jasper, there have been, on the other side of this, right, press conferences from people talking about their children saying, oh, they've been harmed by these products. What are we expecting to hear on that from that side of things?
I think, the gist of it that I've picked up is just sort of these anecdotal representations of cases where, parents have experienced, teenage kids, experiencing schizophrenia or just, feeling dependent on THC products or just, various types of, psychiatric related issues. And it sort of seems to vary case by case. And I'm not fully advised on all the science behind it. So I'm hesitant to say definitively what is actually caused by these products, but that is sort of the argument against it. And of course, in addition to that, just, what we're hearing from the legislative leaders that, they feel that these products are, as we've discussed, just not adequately regulated. And some of those issues arise when there are products that, are maybe not going through enough testing to ensure that there aren't these, massively high levels of THC sort of inadvertently being consumed.
Yeah.
But
and question about marketing and target, is this, could someone mistakenly take this,
right.
And things like that.
Right.
Well, nobody wants to undermine these very real experiences that these families have gone through, especially if the young people in their lives had a predisposition to schizophrenia. Cannabis isn't for everybody. And there are certain people that should not be using it. And those may be some of those examples. I think that we also need to ask about evidence of, was it a bad product? Was it a black market product? What else was in it? Was it the actual cannabinoids that caused this, or was it one of the residual solvents or something left over in it? We talk about poison control calls have gone up in recent years. I think people are more comfortable calling in because it's not illegal. But also, what were the outcomes of that? Did people just get really scared because they took too much and just have to sleep it off? Or was this a real true poisoning where they needed medical intervention? Same with the emergency room visits, which have increased, still not to alarming numbers, but they have increased. But what were the outcomes of those situations? We haven't really been hearing that from the people who are talking about them, and in a way that is meant to instill a sense of fear rather than public information so that we could all make the right choices for ourselves.
I think we can anticipate that all of those arguments are going to be heard a lot over the next couple months as this issue moves through the chambers, and possibly even into the summer, and possibly into the fall, and possibly forever. But unfortunately, we are not going to get into all of that today.
Yeah.
So that is it for today. You can find all episodes of the TribCast on YouTube or wherever you find your podcasts. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share the podcast on all of your platforms. If you'd like to get in touch with the team, you can reach us at tribcast@texastribune.org. Heather, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much.
We want to thank our sponsors, the Safer Texas Alliance and the Beer Alliance of Texas. Our producers are Rob Avila and Chris Svoboda. Our theme music is composed by Rob, and we will see you next week.